I am delighted to welcome Stephanie Gallo here today for our Distinguished Speaker Series. Stephanie is the Chief Marketing Officer for E&J Gallo Winery, and that is a storied winery, 87 years old, founded by Stephanie's grandfather Ernest and great uncle Julio. And wow, what a history that's there. But today stands the largest family-owned winery in the world, very global, shipping wine and spirits to 110 countries. Just incredible. And as you can imagine, many, many different brands, and what a fascinating role sitting as Chief Marketing Officer across a huge portfolio, a global portfolio. And so Stephanie oversees everything related to those brands, including consumer product insights, new brand development, digital marketing, creative development, agency management, marketing effectiveness, sponsorship, experience marketing, media, and public relations. Wow, that is a lot on your plate, Stephanie. And we're so glad that you're willing to spend some time with us. Today, we're going to be talking about the industry. And of course, not only is Stephanie steeped in the industry, but she's also steeped in business, undergraduate degree at the University of Notre Dame and an MBA from Kellogg. And of course, serves in lots of different boards and roles, applying her skills to lots of other places. But I can gather just from her bio and chatting with her that it's the community involvement that really is a huge, huge thing for her and her family, living in her hometown of Modesto with her family, and the impact that she can have there and encouraging others. And of course, like any Californian, she likes to ski and travel and spend time outside, and you gotta love that. Modesto is it's closer to Tahoe than you are if you are in the Bay Area, so that is a good leap up. I lived in the Bay Area twice, Stephanie, and can often remember what Friday afternoon traffic was like trying to get to Tahoe. And starting from Modesto would have been really, really nice.
You actually go to Kirkwood to avoid what you just talked about. So.
Exactly. Yeah, wow, that is so true. The last thing I have to say is that Gallo has been just a premier destination for our marketing students. And I visited their headquarters a couple of years ago. Laura and other alum hosted me when I was there, and it was spectacular. Both the unbelievably rich history of being able to ramble around in deep old cellars and see the history of this 87-year-old enterprise, and yet with that, the most modern business complex that you could imagine, with every bit of technology and accompaniments of a kind of a Bay Area startup feeling to it. Great place to work and a great place to learn marketing. But today we're going to talk about the wine industry a bit and a bit about marketing and just this is and that. But it has been for any industry a crazy year. But like some industries, wine has seen two sides of this last year. And it's fascinating to watch how COVID has played out for different industries. And when you look at wine, for those who quickly pivoted to selling directly to consumers or other online channels, it was a great year. For on the other hand, many businesses associated with wine, like restaurants, hotels, bars, all these things we know and love, tourism, it's just a devastating year. So Stephanie, how did you see the year play out for Gallo in that amazing mix of phenomena?
So first of all, Dean Johnson, thank you so much for the opportunity. Our fondness for your school is mutual. Your alumni have made outstanding and wonderful contributions in many aspects of our organization, whether it's in finance or marketing or even operations. So thank you so much for all that you do. We're deeply appreciative. So to answer your question, specifically, 2020 was definitely an unusual year, and our organization pivoted overnight. And I think it really speaks to the fortitude and the agility that that our employees have. And when we first started our journey together during COVID, we set 3 principles in terms of how we wanted to operate. And I know the Gallo folks that are on the call, I repeated every week, we're going to operate with a tremendous amount of flexibility, empathy, and compassion. And that's really been our mantra in terms of how we're going to go ahead and how we approach 2020 and 2021. I think that from a industry perspective, it really was, how did consumers ultimately respond to COVID? And what we noticed first and foremost was that the primary behavior change, as you mentioned, was that alcohol consumption went away from on-premise to consuming wine and alcohol at home. And so through numerous data sources, we've seen an increase in both retail sales and the number of retail buyers. In fact, we estimate that over 4 million new consumers came into our category during COVID, which for us is wonderful as an industry. People now have the time to enjoy wine with friends. They're discovering new cocktails because they have the time. They're connecting with family over meals, and we hope that continues to trend. You mentioned this before. The other thing that had happened was that our industry has been very, very slow to embrace e-commerce. And overnight, our industry accelerated our e-commerce capabilities in terms of how we sold to consumers and how we connected with consumers. One of the, just to illustrate the point, into November 2020, 1 in 5 drinkers were purchasing alcohol online. In March 2020, that number was 1 in 10. So the acceleration of consumers purchasing alcohol beverages online was amazing. And we pivoted our resources and our capabilities to double down in that channel. The sad story, as you articulated, is really around 2 key areas. Bars and restaurants have been decimated. And we're working hard with our on-premise partners to pivot. With that, on-premise to go is now a new and emerging channel that I believe is here to stay. And we've really helped our partners in ways that we can. As they've pivoted their business model, we wanted to pivot how we support our on-premise partners. And then, of course, the tasting rooms. It's and there's a bright spot in all this. The entire tasting room business model was one that was based on hospitality. And it was very dependent on tourism. But what we learned during this time is that it forced our tasting room folks to pivot. We now offer curbside pickup. We would have never offered that a year ago. We are now connecting with more consumers than we ever have virtually, and we're making our wineries and our winemakers and our chefs accessible to people that may have never had the opportunity to come out to wine country and experience it. So even though there's some segments of our industry that have suffered, what has really inspired me has been just the creativity and the entrepreneurialism that people have demonstrated to keep their businesses respectively afloat.
That's neat. That's neat. I did a little adjustment to my mic. I understood it was a little fuzzy. Does that seem better?
Yeah, it was great to begin with. But
good,
yes.
Good. Our life in Zoom, right? Beyond COVID, you had the double whammy year. The fires, of course, were hugely impactful to the industry. How did that end up affecting your overall business? And what do you see the plan for the future there?
So fires now, I was reflecting on this question. It's been a regular occurrence, since, I think I get the years confused, it all blurs together, but I think since 2017. And so from an operations standpoint, we now are, I hate to say this because this is horrible, but we're prepared. We have a plan. So where we can, we've purchased generators so that if the power goes out, we can continue to operate. I think what makes fires just a little bit challenging for us is that fire season usually happens in the middle of harvest. So pivoting and adapting to that is always a challenge. Thank God, the health and safety of our employees is always at the forefront of our decision making. Our employees are safe. We didn't experience any damages at our wineries. We did have a vineyard that we just did not harvest because of the smoke damage. But with our portfolio being as diverse as it is, the fires have minimally impacted us as a company, but it will impact, I would argue, some of our single vineyard programs. And I think in the whole grand scheme of things, compared to other wineries, we're pretty blessed because of that.
That's great. Well, one of the events of this year that I've been watching with great interest is your acquisition from Constellation Brands. I earlier in my career did some work with the Sand Brothers, probably 10 years ago now, and spent time in northern New York at their facilities and got to know their business a bit. And it was just breathtaking to see Gallo walk in and do an $800 million acquisition of a whole bunch of really storied brands. And well, what's the motivation behind that? We're already big. Wow. Did you need more?
Well, I think that what's really important is just to give you the context. Our company was founded in 1933 with a very simple vision, which was to democratize wine in the United States. And, as we often talk about, and it's actually in our corporate OGSM that's sitting here, we're constantly endeavoring to win new friends for wine. And we fundamentally believe that in order for the wine industry to grow, we have to make wine accessible to all. And what has happened over the last 20 years is that the industry has gone on a premiumization tear. And I think that it's been at the detriment to the overall health of our business, not our business, but of our category. And so we fundamentally believe that it's a huge opportunity for us to continue to win new friends for wine. The portfolio that we have acquired has some amazing brands, whether it's Black Box, Arbor Mist, Manischewitz, Clos de Bois. We think that there's value there, and we think that there's value in dusting some brands off, making them more relevant today. But it's really around doubling down on our commitment to really making the category accessible. And in order to do that, you really have to sell wine at what we call affordable value price points. And we think that we're well positioned to do so.
And that acquisition's going well?
I was just talking to Holly about it. So it is going well because it took 2 years for the deal to close, which is a separate story for another day. But we've had 2 years to plan. We've had 2 years to integrate. And I think that if there's any time to integrate an acquisition of this size, it's great to do it in January when things are slower than usual and you're not in the middle of whether it's harvest in the fall or the holiday selling season in December. So, I think the gift of having 2 years to plan an integration has been very well received. And I know that Holly Hardesty is on the phone, and I was just asking her, how's it going? And it's going as well as it can be expected.
That's great. Well, one of the themes that we've been focusing on around the school, no surprise, is sustainability and some of the issues that touch everyone's business in different ways. And I think one of the things that's interesting to me about the wine industry is that you have, the container side of things, and of course, consumers love bottles, and I'm one of them. I love my bottles, right? I love lining them up, love having them displayed, just really attached to those bottles. But of course, it does take a lot of energy to create those bottles and ship them around the world and so forth. And I'm curious your thoughts on some of the packaging innovation that's going on in the industry, whether it be bag in the box or other things that are more sustainable.
So, I think it's a great question. It's something that, we as an organization sustainability was very important to Giulio even 87 years ago. Um, he was a thought leader in this area before I think anyone was even discussing what sustainability means. It's something that's very important, to our organization. We believe to run a sustainable business is absolutely critical for not only the future of our industry, but for the future of our organization. I think that when you work for a privately owned organization, you can make decisions for the long term, and that's truly what it means to be sustainable. To have a sustainable point of view. We are constantly looking at ways to innovate around packaging, whether it's cans, whether it's, I think, Holly, I don't know if you were our finance person when we embarked upon the lightweight bottle project. I think you might have been on that project.
Possibly. It sounds familiar.
I know but, we embarked upon, reducing the weight of our glass bottles. Bag in the box is definitely something that consumers are embracing, but we're also looking at alternative business models. So an alternative business model may look like shipping wine in bladders to the UK and bottling the wine in the UK so that we don't have to ship heavy glass. It may look like on Barefoot, sourcing wine from Australia and bottling it there. So we're constantly challenging ourselves to say, how can we reduce our footprint, whether it's through packaging, alternative business models, or leveraging our supply chain accordingly.
We've been talking a bit about the product, but I'd love to switch and talk a little bit about really something near and dear to your heart, which is brand. And there's probably no place more interesting than wine to have discussions of brand. And as you kind of look post-COVID, how are you thinking about consumers and their desire to try new brands? Are they going to be falling back on the tried and true? Is there an opportunity here to pivot? And what will brand look like over the next 10 years?
It's a great question. We're constantly thinking about it. I think one of the things that that we want to challenge ourselves with is, so what's happened during COVID, and I don't know if any of your other guests have talked about this, is that consumers are going back to tried and true brands, and it's happened in wine. I think it's happened in other categories as well. So the brands that have won during COVID are those that have very strong brand awareness and consumers perceive to be something as trusted. So brands like Barefoot, brands like Carlo Rossi, brands like Apothic, La Marca, they've all benefited from the brand awareness that existed. I think the primary way that consumers get awareness for our brands, we know this, is either through in-store displays or, quite candidly, through the on-premise channel. It's a great way for people to sample products in a safe environment. So I think that as people could become more comfortable going back into the on-premise environment, as people become more comfortable going back into stores, they're going to want to try new things. It's what makes our category just so wonderful, is the ability to discover and to safely try new things that can enhance your experience. One of the things that hopefully, we're challenging our organization is we now have the gift of 4 million new consumers that have entered into our category. What can we do to keep them engaged in our category after COVID ends? And, the key consumer insight in terms of why haven't you engaged in our category, it's as simple as this, is that I didn't have the time, and I didn't have the time, quite candidly, to open a big bottle of wine. So we think that brands that are going to be really anchored in delivering unique consumer experiences that capitalize on wellness, and more importantly, the deliver on convenience are going to be brands that that people are going to want to associate and try moving forward.
Well, you mentioned earlier tourism, and certainly it may take some time for tourism to recover, but in the meantime, how are wineries finding other kind of meaningful ways to create lasting direct connections with their consumer base?
So I will tell you this. I think people are forced to innovate when constraints are put on them. And not having tourists walk through your doors has really challenged our teams to figure out how they can engage with consumers. It was a constraint that was put on them. And so we've done everything from, and we learned a lot, we failed a lot, we've pivoted, but we've really embraced technology, and we're really creating virtual experiences to make our wine experiences and our hospitality experiences much more accessible to people. So it can look like David Coventry, who's our winemaker on Talbot, offering an intimate personal tasting with a group of wine club members. It can look like Chef Carl, who's our chef at Jay. I know it's a brand that Laura's working on, where he does I think it's either a Saturday supper series or a Sunday supper series. I get the days confused, but where he is highlighting what he is cooking and pairing with wine. We would have never done that before. The only way that you could discover Chef Carl is if you decided to take a trip to the Russian River in California and experience it firsthand. One of our colleagues, he was really passionate about piloting small bottles of wine, luxury wine, and creating tasting kits to make wine accessible as a way to bring new wine club members into our properties. So the point that we're trying to make is that the constraint of not having tourism really forced the innovative spirit to come and really challenge us in terms of how we engage with consumers.
That's neat. That's neat. Well, it's not just wine that's been kind of interesting in your industry. And clearly the hard seltzer category, just, I mean, as you can imagine, any good MBA program, typically we would have a social that occurs maybe a weekly basis. Now in COVID, sadly, those have been put on hiatus, but I can remember just a couple of years ago, seeing the hard seltzers start creeping in to our Thursday night event. We call it Closing Bell. And it just kind of out of nowhere. I remember when I saw some of the first cans coming in and I was, what is this? What is this stuff? And suddenly it's just like the hottest thing in the beverage alcohol industry, with just amazing growth. Where do you see that trend going, and how do you capitalize on that trend?
So when you look at it from a consumer perspective, hard seltzers really capitalizes on 3 mega trends. 1, convenience; 2, health and wellness; and 3, are you delivering a better experience than the alternative? And the alternative is really beer. Hard seltzer has more flavor. There's more ways for you to experience, the day drinking occasion. So the way that we looked at it was, White Claw and Truly have done an amazing job, but where we recognize the opportunity, just like in any category, was that there was an opportunity to provide consumers with a premium offering so that they can go ahead and trade up. And the team did an amazing job really pivoting one of our existing brands, High Noon, around the way that we can offer a premium product is to offer real vodka and real juice, with all the benefits of low calorie associated with it. So we're finding that in any category, but particularly with High Noon, the consumers are willing to trade up and pay more money for what they perceive as a premium experience. And, the strategy is working. It's also validated by the fact that I think this is the second year or the third year in a row where High Noon has won it the best tasting seltzer claim. We think that there's a lot of upside to this category. I've attended a lot of seminars in alcohol beverage, whether it's a beer seminar, a wine seminar, or a spirit seminar. And we think that this need is going to continue to grow. It's going to continue to accelerate. So we're excited about it. From a Gallo standpoint, more on this topic to come, but we're super excited about it.
Neat. Well, I started off by talking a little bit about visiting your amazing corporate headquarters. And now as we were chatting before people were coming online, all of your team is virtual. And I'm sure you've been onboarding MBAs in a virtual environment. How do you see their life onboarding and being part of the Gallo team being different post-COVID? You know, is this virtual work in your organization, is it something that you feel like it's here to stay?
We talked about it before. I think the best way that I can describe it is that it's not going to be what it was in 2019, where we were all together. It's sure as heck not going to be what it was in 2020, where I haven't even seen my colleagues face to face in over a year. I think we went virtual on March 14th. It's going to be a hybrid. I think it's going to be an opportunity for people to enjoy the flexibility of what the virtual environment can offer. But at the same time, recognizing that for certain projects or certain events that we need to be together to collaborate. I think that's what the future of work is going to look like. I think the one question that keeps me up at night about it is that what makes Gallo so special, I believe, is our culture. And we had so many, and you talked about your rituals, right, that you have. But we have so many rituals that really cannot take place in virtually. So how do we maintain, right now I just care, how do we maintain our culture? And then how do we accelerate our culture in this environment? And I know it's something that a lot of companies are trying to figure out as well, but I think that has been the challenge. Right now we're operating on borrowed time where people are leveraging the relationships that they had in the culture. Okay, hey, this is my son, Harrison. But so I think that's what I'm trying to sort through in my mind is how do you maintain your culture during this time? It's hard. I'm not going to lie to you. It's been a challenge.
Mm-hmm. I mean, are there things you've learned about managing teams in a virtual world, things that have worked better than others for you?
I feel more connected with my team. You know, as an example, you just saw my son, right? Like, okay, great. You know that I have a son. And I think that people are seeing so much more of their leaders in an authentic sort of way, which I think is great. I think it humanizes leaders. At the same time, I feel like I have to be awkward and intentional about my management philosophy. I don't think I even have an office at work, even before COVID. I have like this desk, but I'm constantly walking around. That's how I manage. That's how I lead. And I just can't do that. So, you know, I'm awkwardly and intentionally scheduling meetings with folks just to catch up with them. I think that's been the hard part, is trying to figure out how do I do that in this type of environment.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. I was early in my career an HP employee, and I learned there the management by walking around concept, and it's just, that's hard to replicate, that management.
So what some of my colleagues are doing is that they're randomly calling people, and I've started doing that, but I realized that kind of freaks people out. So I don't know if that works, but so I'm trying. So I literally have scheduled like a bunch of I don't know, just catch up. So I'm trying to figure it out. But if you have any advice, let me know. I'm trying to figure
particularly if your children answer the Zoom call, you know, at unexpected moments, and suddenly
I know
your living arrangements are on full display.
I know,
right?
It's crazy. I know. So
well, what experiences can help MBAs interested in wine careers? I know we have a lot of students on today, and many of them are interested in careers in wine. What experiences can help?
I think one of the things that we're really going to drive moving forward, particularly within marketing, is that we really want to we really want to place a value on diversity of experiences. And I think it's easier said than done. But what I can tell you is that there's three key areas, or three key skills, capabilities, however you want to call it, that I just think are essential for anyone that wants a career, whether it's at Gallo or in marketing. I think the first is you have to have a tremendous amount of consumer empathy. You know, when we're in a niche category and we have aspirations to not make wine niche, so why are consumers not choosing to drink wine? Why have we as an industry not made wine accessible? So, you know, and there's, you know, what I'm trying to understand is, you know, empathy for the luxury consumer as we start evolving, you know, our portfolio to appeal to luxury consumers. So empathy is absolutely critical, I think, to being an outstanding marketer. I think the second is curiosity. Really being curious about the world, about different cultures, about different experiences, because I think the best marketers are able to identify patterns, pull them together, and identify opportunities. You know, like the high noon example, you know, just identifying opportunities. Guess what? Every category premiumizes at some point. People are going to want to premiumize in hard seltzer. How do we do it? Okay, let's see how other categories have done it. Let's go ahead and apply that learning, you know, to our category. And then I think that because consumer behaviors are shifting so rapidly by the hour, you're learning agility. How we reach consumers, what are new channels that are emerging? How do we leverage those new channels and apply to our business? How can we learn about a new technology and apply it to our business? So I think curiosity, empathy, and learning agility are just critical skill sets that any marketer needs to have if you want to be successful in our function.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to open it up for some student questions here in a minute. So if you have questions, either pass them along to Rowdy in the chat or raise your hand somehow and we'll call on you. But everyone that comes to Owen for the Distinguished Speaker Series, I always have one question I love to just ask them, and that's an important leadership lesson that you've learned over your career. You've had this amazing career and an unbelievable kind of vantage point over a fascinating industry. And I just love one lesson you'd love to share with us.
So I want to answer your question directly, because as I was reflecting on this, when Matthew sent me the questions, you said one. So I want to answer the one.
You could pick two if you want.
I'll answer the one because I thought long and hard about this. And I think the lesson that I've learned is that you have to lead with the values at the forefront of your decision-making. And as you accelerate and as you grow in your career, the decisions become harder. And you have to make tough decisions each and every day. And the only thing that will get you through it is that if you can go to bed at night, as my brother Joe will say, and you can put your head on the pillow, knowing that you made the decision in accordance to your own personal values. We're very values driven as a company, and our corporate values align with our family values. Did you operate with integrity? Did you treat that person with respect? Were you committed? But I think that if you can lead with the values at the forefront of your decision-making, it makes the hard decisions somewhat more manageable to make. So I think that's the one leadership lesson that I've learned that I think is the most important.
That's great. Well, questions from the audience?
Yeah, so I have one, and then we can go to the raise hands. But Grainer Thorne, a second year, would like to know your thoughts on how to differentiate brands in a crowded marketplace, especially for a category like Pinot Noirs.
I think that there's two ways that that you can differentiate. I think that one is really on your taste profile, and really being distinctive and having a point of view on your taste profile. So I think the best example in Pinot Noir that comes to mind would be Meiomi. Meiomi is this is prior to the Constellation acquisition, but Meiomi was able to put themselves on a map because they created a Pinot Noir that was very consumer friendly, and the wine industry thought that it did not taste like Pinot Noir. But they truly had a revolutionary style that was just distinctive. So that's one way, is truly differentiating by product. And the second really is to differentiate by what we would call image attribute. I think that many brands tend to use and deploy the same winemaking tropes that appeal to it, but those brands that are able to break out are those that are able to have a meaningful point of view from a design standpoint.
Thank you, Dean Johnson. Thanks so much, Stephanie, for taking the time to be with us today. I really appreciate it. My question is twofold. One was, what are some of your lessons around, just general lessons around why Gallo stayed away from going public? And secondly, to add context to it, so my parents immigrated to Canada from India. I grew up in India, and so I have a lot of friends whose families own businesses that are private, right? In India, they tend to stay private a lot. And I've just seen it a lot around just the constraint of innovation. You were talking about constraints, and succession planning becomes hard, and it's a hit or miss. I mean, some kids are very proactive. The other kids who are taking it over are not. They're not as interested in business. And so just around that context of constraint, not being public, being private. I mean, I obviously understand the advantage from like a sustainability perspective and a planning perspective, et cetera, et cetera. But how does Gallo plan for the down? How do y'all put in systems to mitigate the downside of it?
I think it's a great question. I'll answer your first question is, why did we remain private? It's what the founders wanted. I once asked my grandfather, we used to eat lunch together on a weekly basis when he was in his 90s. And I said to him, did you ever think you were going to be this successful? And he says, this was never the plan. He's like, the plan was always to be family owned and operated because you can control your own destiny. And not to get in on it, but he and his brother had a pretty tumultuous life. So controlling your own destiny was critical to him. You can make decisions for the long term. So that's the first thing. I think also the very nature of the wine business is that you have to make decisions for the long term in order to be successful. Brand building, you have to make decisions for the long term. But we think that the benefit of being privately owned and operated is that it benefits the business that we're in. As far as succession planning is concerned, the best thing that happened to us was about 20 years ago, we decided to bring in an outside board to help guide us. And they raised the level of professionalism across the board. And they are very thoughtful in terms of succession planning. And, right now, my brother Ernest just became CEO in June of 2020. And it was a very thoughtful, considered decision that, quite candidly, our outside board had a lot of help in preparing him. But we've always said, time and time again, that a family member does not necessarily need to be CEO. The person that is most qualified needs to be CEO. But if we can stay and remain family owned and operated, it's our wishes. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's the story on succession planning.
That gives me context. Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Hi, Stephanie. Thank you for speaking to us. I'm a second here at Owen and just excited to get to learn from your experience. You've talked a little bit about sustainability and about how E&J Gallo sort of thinks about being a sustainable player in the winemaking space. And of course, E&J Gallo is intimately tied to California. It's a leading California wine producer. But we also know that California is facing a lot of challenges, specifically environmental challenges around, you talked about forest fires and drought. I was just curious, like from a brand perspective, how do you see E&J Gallo heading into the future? Is there kind of foresight going into, the planning about what happens if the situation environmentally changes in California that makes it difficult to continue growing wine there or to meet the quality standards that you guys are used to? How does that kind of look like from a branding perspective?
Look, I think it's a great question. I think it depends on the brand. So, I'll use a very simple example, Barefoot. Barefoot is a brand that's not anchored in appellation or origin. I'm going to go ahead and just simplify what it stands for. I know the brand team has changed it, but in its essence, it's fun, flavorful, and affordable wine. Where the wine comes from is secondary, as long as it meets the style requirements. And we have a wonderful winemaker, Jen Wall, who oversees that program. And she can craft that style of wine, whether it's coming from Chile or Australia or, you name it. So where a brand is not anchored in its appellation, we believe that we have flexibility. Where it does become problematic would be a brand that is that could be anchored in Napa, for example. If your brand is rooted in Napa, by the way, and even tied to a specific vineyard, it becomes problematic. But we're always looking for creative ways to solve business challenges, and we believe that sourcing is a global opportunity, and we're constantly forming relationships with other producers outside of California to help us mitigate risks.
So we have another question from the chat. Aaron Campbell would like to know what your favorite red and white wines are.
That's like asking if I like, my kids always say this, am I your favorite? Am I your favorite? I could tell you the way that I'll answer that question is what's in my refrigerator. So right now we're drinking a lot of the Whitehaven Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand. So that's what's in my refrigerator. And as far as reds are concerned, I have a lot, but the one that I'm really nerding out over is wines from our Monte Rosa vineyard in Sonoma. So Brene Royale is our vineyard manager, and whether it's the Malbec or the Cabernet Franc or the Zinfandel or the Cabernet, there's just some amazing wines that are coming out of Monte Rosa. So it's not necessarily a brand, but it's a vineyard that we have that I'm kind of nerding out over.
Very cool. I actually have a question. So with the rise of Drizzly and delivery services, how do you think about presenting your product in a digital space versus retail? And what are the different tactics that you are using to get your product in front of consumer, especially when there's not as much impulse buying and things like that?
It's a great question. I'll tell you how we're handling it. First of all, in a digital environment, brands matter. So when you look at brands that are selling on Drizzly within our portfolio, it's brands that have high brand awareness, or brands that are the category leader. So as an example, you probably have not heard of Alamos Malbec, but if you Google Malbec, Alamos will rise to the top of the search because it is the #1 selling Malbec. But what it's really forced us to do from a design standpoint is really look at how we design our brands to compete in the digital shelf. And I think that what is really, really important is when you look at the hierarchy of your brand, do you have strong distinctive assets that can translate over into it? So like, on Barefoot, I would argue that the foot is a very strong distinctive asset that can translate over. High Noon Cans, in terms of how that was designed with the sun in the middle of the trademark, is a great brand that has a distinctive asset. Another classic example within the four walls of ours is La Marca with the signature blue. Veuve Clicquot is another great example of a brand that has very strong distinctive assets. So it's often, more times than not, when we are now partnering with our creative team, it's what does it look like on the digital shelf, because it has to work in both the analog environment as well as the digital environment.
I find myself increasingly with my phone in the wine aisles and looking at both physical and then thinking about either things that I've enjoyed before and looking them up, to Googling or going on to my favorite, Wine Spectator or whatever, to learn about it while I'm in the store. Is that a common phenomenon? And how do you take advantage of that in the channel?
So, we often talk about this. It is very common, particularly in our category where people are starving for information. So, we are doubling down, and it's basic, but do you have a basic search strategy in place? When you Google Moscato, what brand hopefully rises to the top? I hope it's Barefoot. It's how, we've even partnered with what we're going to call Commerce Media Solutions, that when you're in the four walls of the store, and are we serving up ads in a way that is not necessarily intrusive, but it makes sense for what you're trying to do. So it's going to be a major initiative for us. Look, we talk about it all the time. The way that our brands have been built over the last 87 years have been winning within the four walls of the store. Wine's extremely impulsive, but what I've been tasked with doing is, how are we going to win outside the four walls of the store, so that when people come into the store, they already have their decision made. So it's going to be a major cultural shift for us, and it's something that I'm going to be working on over the next year. I don't have an answer yet, but we got to rethink how we approach it.
And has virtual reality played into that at all in the store experience? It may be just not that relevant for wine, but
it's, we're trying to figure it out. I do have an idea. We tried virtual reality with this summer. We did a Black Eyed Peas program where it's really interesting. Think about it. Musicians had the opportunity to play in crowded concerts. That went away. And so the Black Eyed Peas, we formed a great partnership where they dropped their summer single, and the way that it was presented was that you basically take your phone and you scan it on the foot, and then a virtual concert would show up on your phone. It did okay. I think the adoption of it is still a little bit wonky, but we're going to learn. So I think that it's a great way, again, to bring experiences to consumers that they may not necessarily have an opportunity to travel out to California.
Stephanie, you had mentioned this past year's really pushed innovation in the industry. I know we already talked a little bit about seltzers and their growth. Some of our classes, I guess my classes this semester, we've been going over a bunch of cases of companies that have really opened up to kind of crowdsourcing ideas for innovation. We talked about Starbucks and ways that they kind of helped improve their customer experience by having websites dedicated to places where they could ask questions and kind of suggest new ideas. Is that something E&J Gallo is doing, or are there ways for customers to really push their thoughts forward as ways to innovate?
I think it's a great question. We were able to do that through what I would say liquid to lips demos and tastings, right? Like, you have a customer at a store, try the product, give you feedback. One of the things that I've tasked our consumer engagement team with doing is, how do we make consumer engagement a competitive advantage for our company? And that is the vision that we have. Hopefully we'll be able to sort through it. But the vision is, how do we create communities of people that can provide us feedback on new product ideas, packaging, promotions. The brand in our portfolio that is currently doing it is E&J Brandy. And it is a very active community. It is on Facebook. They engage, they highlight members of their community. But I do believe that the line extension that they rolled out this summer last winter around E&J Spice was an effort around leveraging communities. My job at the end of the day is, I got to let the brand teams do what they got to do. But if I notice something that's happening on one brand, how do I then take it and then syndicate it across all our other brands? So that's an example of something that I've really tasked our consumer engagement team with doing. How do we foster and build communities for that reason?
Hi, Stephanie. I have a question a little more specific to the industry in Gallo. You had mentioned earlier that you're starting to move into the small formats of the luxury brands. And I actually got really excited when I saw the J in the liquor store the other day. So my question is around, Why wasn't that done before? I'm sure some of the risks is commodifying a luxury brand, and kind of what about COVID pushed you to push those innovations a little farther and actually start pulling the trigger and releasing some of these innovations that pre-COVID you may not have done?
So I don't think we're moving fast enough in that area. In fact, we had a growth leadership team meeting on this topic yesterday. and there's probably two good reasons. I think that there's a good reason and a real reason. The good reason is probably what you talked about. What is the image? You know, is it going to be detrimental to our image? I think La Marca in our portfolio has taught us that people are willing to pay a premium for an elevated experience. I think that could be the good reason. You know, the other real reason is that it requires an investment in figuring out some of the technical challenges of how do you deliver a Russian River Pinot Noir in a small pack without it getting oxidized pretty darn quickly. So my attitude is, if there's a consumer need, great, we'll go ahead and figure out the technical challenges with doing it. So we're gonna be pretty bullish and move forward in this area. More to come on that.
I had one last one, which came in another way, and it was, you know, about mentorship.
Oh yeah.
So it's a good one to end on. Thinking about mentors in your life and how they impacted you. You know, that's a subject that we spend a lot of time thinking about here with our students. How to find good mentors and really use them to leverage your career.
So, you know, if it's okay with you, I want to answer the question in a nuanced sort of way. And it's something that I've been really reflecting on. I think that there's a difference between a mentor and a sponsor. And in your career, you need both. I look at as a mentor as someone that I can go to for advice, for perspective, to help me solve, you know, a business challenge, to challenge me. If I'm working on a developmental skill, can you give me tips, tricks, and ideas that that can help me be better? But I think that you're also going to need a sponsor, and they're different. They're absolutely different. My mentor is not necessarily my sponsor. And a sponsor is someone that's going to advocate for you when you're not in the room. And I think that people often confuse both. And there are folks that may not necessarily be the person in the room discussing your career, but they can be an amazing mentor to you to help you work through some technical challenges. So, you know, to answer your question specifically, you know, I have, you know, two primary mentors that come to mind. One is a former colleague of mine, Lou Pascalis. He's now over at Bank of America, but he really mentored me early on in my career, really pushed me. I still go to him today when I was sorting through the changing media landscape, particularly around media. It's a gap that I have around performance media, and I need to get up to speed pretty darn quickly on it. So I'm constantly on the phone with him, talking to him about, am I thinking about this right? We're looking at consolidating agencies. Is this the right thing? So I go to him for that. My dad is the second person who's just been an amazing mentor to me throughout my career. From a sponsorship standpoint, you know, I was thinking about this. I think that Michelle Lewis, who is our global head of HR, I fundamentally believe that I'm in the job that I'm in today because of Michelle Lewis. She was the person that was sponsoring me and advocating for me and advocating the need for a CMO in our organization when we've never had one before. So for those of you that are on the phone, it's having a mentor and it's having a sponsor. You need both of them in your career in order to advance. So I didn't mean to go off the rails, but just to provide a different perspective.
No, that's fantastic and really, really important advice, because it's easy to confuse those and they're not the same.
They're not the same. And, you know, I'll have a mentor. One of my goals this year was just, I have a mentor around, you know, understanding just the nuances associated with wine, you know, like, am I looking at this the right way? But that's different than a sponsor. So need both. You need both in your career.
Well, Stephanie, where does an hour go? It's
I don't know.
too
It's been a
short.
great
Too
experience.
short. But
So just on behalf of everyone in the extended Gallo family, I just wanted to say thank you again, Dean Johnson, for just your partnership and everything that you do.
And likewise, I look forward to being able to travel to the West Coast with some of our students and come to Modesto again.
Absolutely.
You've been such a great partner and a great place for our students to start careers. And we're really grateful. And we're really grateful for some lovely barefoot Chardonnay.
Lovely.
Or brut.
Yeah, so cheers.
Yeah, cheers, cheers.
Okay, everyone. Well, thank you so much and have a great day. Stay safe.